Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series. Take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video will be reviewing the Monster Supplement Monster Weaknesses, designed by Dan Kahn et al. A lot of very talented writers and designers for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This review has been sponsored by the publisher, and a review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you are interested in a sponsored review, please reach out via email, Twitter, or Discord, or my submission form via roguewatson.com. And if you enjoy the content, consider using my affiliate links for online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. So when you're battling monsters or even engaging with them socially, occasionally a player may want to do something that's a bit outside the box. They want to get creative with something. They want to use, the environment, or maybe they want to try to exploit a certain part of the creature's, anatomy, or maybe they're even using some kind of contextual meta knowledge about this, rumors they've heard about these creatures or anything else. And you as the DM have to then come up with something on the fly, because a lot of times we want to reward our players for thinking outside the box and doing something that isn't just, to use video game parlance, basic attacking all the time, right? I swing my weapon, I cast my spell. But what if they did something a little bit more, interesting, like, for example, grappling a dragon to prevent it from using its breath weapon, which is showcased on this fabulous cover art, along with a foreword that literally just explains the entire D&D party story. Usually a foreword is like the designer coming through and saying, hey, why did I make this? But no, this is just a straight up narration of this entire event as this D&D group takes on this dragon and kind of gives an example of how to use a monster weakness. This is a 50-plus page book that provides weaknesses for every monster in the base 5e monster manual, which I don't know offhand how many that is, but I'm guessing it's somewhere above 250 if you include especially all the little beasts and all the individual NPC humanoid stat blocks. This covers weaknesses for every single one of those, and it gives at least one combat weakness for every single one, and a lot of them also have social weaknesses, which you can exploit in non-combat situations, which means there are over 500 weaknesses in total, which is a crap ton of content. Now, what's fun is that I think they're very easy to implement, and I think a lot of DMs are probably already using, as I just mentioned in the beginning, this system just more kind of on the fly. Like, you have to come up with, okay, well, that means they're gonna have to make a save for this, or maybe you make a skill check and then it happens, and that's fine. That's a big part of playing D&D, frankly, is having people come up with these crazy schemes and ideas, whether it's out of a combat situation or in the middle of a combat situation, and then the DM's job is to adjudicate that and try to come up with rules for it on the fly. This is very helpful because it basically gives you those rules for a lot of those situations. Now, obviously, this isn't going to try to, say, hey, just in case your players do this to this creature, this to this creature. That's not what this is about. Instead, it says, all right, let's pick one major flaw or weakness or whatever structural design flaw that we have in these particular creatures. We're going to focus on that, and we're going to give it mechanics in order to use that, whether it's a a missed save or a minus AC or something that makes sense, and really does a pretty good job of balancing the line between being a little too fiddly and complex, and then not really making it too esoteric to where it doesn't really matter when it comes down to the player doing a thing. And I think this does a pretty good job of the right balance. I never felt like anything here was, too confusing. It stayed away from things that were like, oh, you get plus tier, plus modifiers and things, because I think 5e almost entirely did away with that and just sticks to advantage, disadvantage, or conditions, which is a lot of case here. So you might inflict the blinded condition, or the poison condition, or you force them to reckless attack, which means they'll attack with advantage, but then you've got advantage on them. Or maybe they'll lose their entire turn because of something that they're doing. In other words, they're incapacitated temporarily. So it takes a lot of advantage from things that are already in 5e that I think are easier to run and easy to keep up with for the DM. So I'm a big fan of how this does those weaknesses. You're going to get, quantity over quality, but I do think that the ones that it picks for all the monsters is actually pretty high quality. So instead of picking hey, here's because other books I feel like they would do, hey, here's like 20 monsters and we're gonna build them almost like I'm playing Horizon Forbidden West right now, and a big part of that game is you can target individual like monster components and disable some of their attacks. And partly what I was picturing going into this is like, okay, maybe we're doing that where you can, or the Fallout VAT system, right, where you can target certain body parts and thus maybe cripple certain limbs or do something. This doesn't attempt to do that. Instead, it just says, hey, let's look at all the monsters in the monster manual and let's pick like one thing a player could do in order to take advantage of them. So again, it can't really predict all the things that players can do, but I think the things that it does pick are pretty effective. And thus, I think this is a really, really awesome, highly recommended tool that DMs can use. It's also just very lovingly probably also designed. It's got some original character art in the form of these experts that introduce all the different creature types. Also, it does not skimp on the table of contents, which a lot of supplemental books do. Thankfully, this does not. It organizes all the monsters by type, as well as literally just individually listing them all. Every single monster on the table of contents. But each of the creature types has its own in-universe expert, which I love because a lot of books, they'll be like, it's, Mordenkainen's blah, 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 or the Xanathar's blah, 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 and then that person will never actually appear at all. You just kind of slap their name on it, Krusty the Clown style. Whereas here, it's not just, it's not one person's sole book, and it doesn't say anything, it's just monster weaknesses, but we do get that personality injection in the form of all these awesome experts with this cool, little headshot here. And there's Gitzerai, there's a Mind Flayer, the expert on humanoids, there's scholars, bounty hunters, dragon slayers, a Myconid. The undead expert is, of course, a vampire. Just really, really fun. And it doesn't take much to make me really love that personality. There's like a paragraph or two in the beginning. There's a little description of this person. And then they've got these cute little, sidebars that you can see that are kind of written throughout. And it's not a whole lot, but it's enough for me. That's really what I'm looking for, is just giving enough of that personality to make it so I'm not reading just a treatise on, monsters. And that, can be interesting. And a lot of folks, do love that kind of thing where we just absorb this knowledge. But I also like being entertained while I'm reading these supplements. And this absolutely checked that box for me. So I thought that was a delightful addition, was to add all of these experts, and I think that's really what I'm looking for. And really, I didn't expect it because, like I said, the cover of the book didn't have, it was so-and-so's book. It's just, hey, we brought together all these experts. Everybody's, got their chosen fields that they're really good at, and here's all the information that they've learned. And that's awesome. That's super thumbs up for that. I will mention that the feat that it adds as an optional feat, Tactician, is basically like how we use my house rules in our house game, our D&D live streaming game you can see on YouTube every Friday night. Is you can, in our house rules, you can make a skill check depending on what kind of creature type it is, and depending on the roll that you make, that's how much information you learn. So for example, if you roll a 10 to a 14, you might learn like a basic strength versus the party, like whether it's cut out for you or whether it's super strong or super weak, if you really haven't heard of this thing. And if you roll like better, you might learn certain attacks it can do, certain vulnerabilities it has. And this says, hey, you can have your characters roll these things. They should all be tied to intelligence, but you can use different skills. There's a variant that very few people use in D&D, which is that you can actually uncouple the default skills to attributes and just say you want to make an intelligence nature check, or I think actually intelligence is nature, intelligence religion check, or actually I believe the rest of these are intelligence, aren't they? Arcana, nature, history, and investigation. So it's really just, I think religion is supposed to be wisdom, but in any case, I think that's a fair rule to have. I would just have that be a baseline rule. I wouldn't even include that as a feat because it's a baseline rule in our home games. But you can use these weaknesses to, in other words, force your player to roll to gain this information. Or you could just showcase it and see, like, something happens during the course of a fight. Like, maybe you want it to be a hidden weakness that they discover because of just things they're doing. And the example they use is that a cloaker, and there's some other like drow, I think, and some other creatures that operate in the darkness, where if you suddenly introduce bright light, lighting a torch or casting the light spell, then this negative, their weakness is suddenly highlighted. In this case, they have to make a save, or I believe they like ungrapple themselves and like retreat from the light, which is a pretty big deal, just from supposedly casting a cantrip or using your action to light a torch. But it's something that you might not know about. Or you could make learning about these, enemies, maybe even another quest line. There's one about when you get to the Taurus, because I know, raise your hand if you're always looking up what the Taurus weaknesses are, or anytime there's a bunch of creatures, you want to look at the strongest one. And in that case, the Taurus weakness is that you have to inscribe the death symbol and literally the spell of symbol on the inside of its stomach lining. So you've been ingested or you've teleported inside, I guess. You could maybe teleport inside its stomach. That would be a very memorable thing to do. And then it is reduced to 0 hit points when that goes off. I mean, what a cool story that is to do that. Obviously, that's part of the context of an entire quest, right? Is how do we defeat this Taurus? Well, you learn this information ahead of time because you're probably not going to accidentally stumble upon doing that, or maybe you are, which would be crazy. But I think that's interesting. And it does say, because you're introducing these weaknesses, does that mean you're making all these fights suddenly easier? Maybe. It depends on how like I said, are you making these weaknesses pretty obvious, or are you making your players figure them out? Do you let them give those free rolls like I do, in terms of, hey, here's a free action where you can determine things, in which case, if they rolled high enough, maybe you would learn some of these specific weaknesses? Or is it that you'll only learn them when these weaknesses manifest themselves? And it says, and when you can just rebalance things, you can give things more hit points, make them more, more creatures in general, or maybe this allows you, for example, to use higher level, deadlier monsters, knowing that there's an exploitable weakness that your players are going to find out, hopefully, and that's a way you can balance using more powerful monsters. So I think that would be a useful tool as well. So I think this is a really cool supplement. I'm going to go through and show you some of the ideas that I've seen, which I think are pretty cool. The Beholder, another one I always look up because Beholders are pretty unique and one of the marquee D&D creatures. If you're holding a reflective surface, obviously like a hand mirror or something, you can actually use your reaction if you have succeeded. So if a Beholder attacks you with its ray, I think most, if not all, of the rays involve a saving throw. If you make the save and you're holding a reflective surface, you can use your reaction to redirect the eye ray at either somebody else or back at the Beholder. If you do it to the Beholder, it doesn't affect the Beholder, but it does cause the Beholder to lose one of its legendary actions for 1d4 rounds. That's pretty interesting. So you don't get to now you have to make the death save, Beholder, because that's kind of shitty for the DM, but it does weaken it somewhat. Now it does make it so it clouds over the reflective surface, so you can't use it, you can't abuse it too often, but that's a neat little side thing to do. And that's something that, would you let a player just somehow figure out that they can try to do this and bounce back the beams, or that maybe that's something they learn, maybe that's the reward for a puzzle they've done or a side quest they complete or something else, where they're like, hey, those beams can be redirected by reflective surfaces or something if you can withstand the attack, or a better way of describing it, make it obvious, but still, those are the kind of things I think are pretty interesting. The Achyug is a pretty good example of the classic, and this could be done out of combat also. Well, can I throw a piece of meat or something to distract the monster? Yes, you can, absolutely, and I will reward you for that, because the Achyug is food driven. And if presented with food of any kind, it must make a DC 12 Wisdom saving throw. On a failed save, it uses its next turn to move toward the food and using its bite attack. So now you've basically caused it to lose an entire round, right? Because it does its movement, it does its attack, and that was its whole round because you just threw a food out there. And I like the fact that as a DM, it would be tricky to rule that, because that's an out of the box thinking, and I like that, but you're not really expending any resources. You're not making any skill checks to do that. It's tough for me as a DM to figure out, I want to reward this, but also you're just telling me you're doing something instead of I want to figure out some kind of a reward fail system there. And I think just having it be okay, you can always throw the food, but it's the creature that then gets to make this wisdom saving throw to determine if it's basically distracted by the food. Oh, that's a great idea. So just those kind of things are really great for these monster weaknesses. And I was surprised there's actually very few overlaps. You'd think that with, hundreds of weaknesses, there would be a lot of every single, ravenous creature, you can just throw meat out and it would be distracted. Honestly, I didn't see too many that were completely, there is some, obviously, because there's a lot here, and there are a bunch that you can, and there's also a lot of creatures that just kind of overlap in general. But I was impressed that for the most part, they're pretty unique weaknesses, and there's only a couple where you can throw the food out there and have it be properly distracted. Beasts have a lot of really fun references, I noticed, just to kind of go through some. Like, I think a lot of people kind of know the bear rules, which is that if you encounter a brown bear, you should play dead. That's like a grizzly bear. And if you encounter a black bear, you should actually make yourself big and large and, like, you know, make noises and scare it away. And then if you encounter a polar bear, you're just fucked, is how I've always heard it. Now, in this case, I would have laughed really hard if it said that for polar bears. Like, the polar bear has no weaknesses. But actually, the polar bear is, like, weak to fire, I believe. It has a aversion to fire, which, fine. But it is in there about the brown bear and the black bear, which I think was pretty clever. In other words, you can literally trick it by falling prone and feigning death, or you can, like, shout. And all these things involve, you know, skill checks that seem, with the DC appropriately tied to the strength and power level of that creature. Giant wasps are weak to poison damage, aka pesticides, which can stun it. Rats can be let off, kind of Pied Piper style. Goats and trolls have a thing with each other, and trolls also have a thing with goats, with the whole Billy Goat Gruff thing. There's a itsy bitsy spider reference, so spiders have trouble with water areas. Horses have a weakness to pole arms as they're charging forward. I love the bit about ravens. They can be, I believe, distracted by thaumaturgy, which is, like, you know, the quoth the raven, nevermore, the knocking on the door. Allosauruses can't take sharp corners. I wrote Jurassic Park reference, question mark. Is that like from the kitchen scene where they're like running around and they just like run into an oven or something? I would have also accepted maybe they're vulnerable to illusion magic, because I believe that was a thing from the kitchen scene as they run into what is a reflective surface of the oven shininess as they're trying to get the kids. Those kind of references are really fun. Honestly, with monster weaknesses, I was fully expecting them to skip beasts, right? Like, because you don't really, that's not something you're typically needing to take advantage of when it comes to weaknesses. Typically, if your players are really caring about monsters, it's the more powerful threats are like, okay, what do we need to do to figure out this, you know, to beat this monster instead? But we've got everything here. Literally, the designer didn't skip anything. So I appreciate all these really cutesy, fun references. And there's still, you know, yeah, some of them are kind of nudge, nudge, wink, wink, jokey, but they're also, you know, they've all have mechanics with them, which I appreciate. They kind of back it up. Let's see, some other cool ones. The Solar, you can sever its great sword ability by, first you have to have disarmed it, then you make a DC 20 intelligence or charisma check, and on a success, you sever the connection that the Solar has to its sword, and it loses its flying sword action for a minute. That's pretty awesome. Like, also, I feel like that's something a player might discover on their own. Like, if they somehow they've forced this creature to drop the sword or something, and they grab it, and they're like, "Can we do something to turn it off, or can I just take it or something?" I would, even if they're not quite understanding like what they want to do, I'd be like, "Hey, roll this check and see if you can." And then I might tease the fact that you can feel that, you know, connection. You're trying to pull against it and sever it, but maybe you can't quite break it, or you do break it. You know, whatever it is. That's, you know, as a DM, you can really play it up. If you know the information the players don't, but if they're kind of dancing around it, then you might be able to get close and get them to understand those weaknesses on the fly, which would be really satisfying, I would expect, from a player point of view. For 21, the Flesh Golem, you can cast the Animate Dead spell on a Flesh Golem to basically temporarily gain control of it for an hour. That's really interesting. I wouldn't have even thought of that. Animated armor, you can, if you have proficiency in heavy armor, you can deduct its AC with your attacks. And for the Rug of Smothering, if you are proficient in Weaver's tools, you can spot structural weaknesses in the rug. And that gives it, I believe, like, you do extra damage to it, and it can lose its the trait where it transfers damage when it wraps somebody up. Talk about an awesome way of using, like, these proficiencies that you quickly, like, forget about, you know, after character creation. Like, that's really clever. I kind of wish there was more of those. I didn't see too many that were like, hey, you need, you know, this kind of proficiency in order to take advantage of this weakness. But that's a further way of just helping, you know, look at the character sheet and be like, oh yeah, I can do this. That's a pretty cool idea. The Shield Guardian, if you give it its own amulet on the Shield Guardian, you know, because they're controlled by the amulet, it goes berserk, and it means it attacks the nearest creature it can see. After a minute, the amulet shatters, and it becomes a fully independent sentient creature. Its alignment changes to neutral, its charisma score increases to 10. You've completely freed this thing, and that's what a crazy cool idea that is. Obviously, that adds a whole nother element to this creature that I think is awesome, and that frankly should be part of its stat block from now on. I love it. Like, what if we wanted to make it like a genie that becomes, you know, the real boy or whatever? Like, that's awesome. I want the Shield Guardian to be its own person. Let's see, other cool ideas. There's obviously all the dragons are here. The blue dragon lightning rod is a really unique one where if you can forego making the save against its lightning breath weapon attack, and if you have a lightning damage spell prepared, in other words, it's on your class list and it's ready to go, you can forego to make the save and instead make an ability check by spending your 3rd or higher level spell. It's a little fiddly, but I'm trying to explain it best I can. If you succeed, you take no damage from the breath weapon, and then on your next attack, if you cast a lightning spell, you actually bypass the creature's lightning immunity. It's just called Lightning Rod. That's very, very unique and specific, but really interesting. Somebody really thought about that and applied that. And it's what I like about the dragons is it's not like everybody has, it's poison rod and they have all the different variants of that. No, they're actually all pretty, like the green dragon just has a vulnerable neck that you can grapple and choke and stop it from spewing its breath weapon. The black dragon is like vulnerable to psychic damage, or no, sorry, if it becomes charmed, it takes psychic damage. A number of d8 psychic damage dice equal to the spell's level. So it's not that it's just, hey, here's the dragons, they all have their own little dragon variants. Like each one of these is actually pretty unique, which is very impressive. By the way, good mix of stock art and original art. I really appreciate that. This is basically what I want to see from stock art is that it uses to it's used in conjunction of having this lovely, beautiful, original commission character. Not that the stock art isn't nice looking, it is obviously, but as somebody who reviews, hundreds of products over the years, I've grown to be very recognizable of a lot of the stock art, and I'm perfectly fine seeing it, but I also want to see, other stuff. And I think this does a great balance between giving me that original art, some full page artwork, which is awesome, but really this character art, which I'm really a huge fan of it. But frankly, not expecting from a monster book. Monster books especially tend to use stock art because it's just, there's a ton of, monsters available as stock art, and you can just slap that in there because it fits all your monster themes. So I really like that we get, in addition to the usual monster stock art, which there's some over there, there's awesome original character art of these portraits. And there's our elemental Jabari the Mighty. The genie introducing all the elementals. Really fun Gargoyles reference here. The Gargoyle Sunlight Petrification starts to turn in sunlight, must succeed on DC 15 con save or become petrified. The Galabdur blurts out geology nerd stuff. I wrote this one down. Basically, this is like a non-combat one, but if you're just walking around commenting on like the structure of a place or the earthiness of it, then these creatures just can't help themselves and they have to make a DC 15 wisdom save or just blurt out corrections and factoids, possibly giving up secrets or hidden locations in its excitement and causing it to lose the benefits of false appearance for 1 minute. That's a good gag, but also it's pretty effective because you could learn like secret doors or something just by putting a Galabdur there that just can't quite keep quiet, which is pretty funny. A Null Fang of Yanagu. This is one where I feel like you could do a good job of explaining it to the players just through descriptions, which is this thing is just laughing at you maniacally. Well, if you've got a, very sassy player character, I certainly know a few, they'd be like, well, I'm going to laugh right back at them. They're like, all right, do you want to use your bonus action to laugh at this Gnoll? And they'd be like, hell yeah, I do. And then the Gnoll has to then make a DC 12 wisdom save. And suddenly we've got this monster weakness you found. And if it fails the save, it must spend its turn moving and attacking the creature. Basically using reckless attack like the barbarian, which means it has advantage on its attacks, but then you all have advantage on its attacks. So I think that's really cool, and that's one that to me feels like the players would absolutely discover that weakness, because I feel like that's something a player would obviously want to do back to a Gnoll. Just about every fiend and devil, and I think humanoid has both combat and social weaknesses, which makes sense because that's a lot of the kind of creatures you'd be meeting with in non-combat situations. You can force a Valar to monologue by making contested intimidation checks. Literally, it loses its turn just monologuing about how great it is, which is fucking awesome. You can make a rude gesture at a Merilith, which is the snake demon with a bunch of arms. And it might make one back if it fails its save, in which case it loses one of its multi-attacks. Drow can be blinded by light. Gnolls can drop down laughing from seeing a crit or somebody die. And you can feign death by dropping to prone and making a deception check to trick goblins into thinking that they killed somebody, and they will move on to the next target. All of these are really cool ideas that just, it's more than monster weaknesses. It's making combat spicier and more exciting than just basic attacking back and forth. And that is such a cool aspect of it that I feel like is almost bearing the lead in monster weaknesses, because I think, like, yes, obviously exploiting, monster weaknesses is fun, but this is far better than just hit the glowing red part of the monster to do double damage. That's what I feared some of it would be, or like hit this part of the monster to disable its certain kind of weapon. I mean, again, I like doing that thing in Horizon. I think it's really fun, but there's no DM running the Horizon game and running, and making all these battles being, very memorable and story focused and all that. And not every battle has to be. I'm not sure I would want to use monster weaknesses for necessarily every battle, but man, you just insert like one or two of these, and it would be pretty easy to keep track because you as a DM know what creatures you've got ahead of time, right? So you would just look, even though there's hundreds here, you could just look up ahead of time and be like, hey, okay, here's what I want to do with my goblins and my half ogre, and I've got these monster weaknesses here, and this one I want the players to realize. Maybe even they might learn about it ahead of time. I might put a note in there about how, what the Cyclops is, can become charmed if you cast spells. Maybe I'll have like a note in there that they can find and be like, oh man, every time we cast a spell, the Cyclops is just in awe. And then the players, that's how they learn that monster weakness, right? Through that context. Or maybe they'll just discover it accidentally. They're battling this thing and they'll cast a spell and the Cyclops goes, ooh, look at that, And by the way, that is one of the weaknesses. The Cyclops becomes awed by basically any kind of spell. So I think it's a really, really cool idea. There's just absolute ton of content here. I like the way it's structured, the layout, the organization. You can finally headshot zombies. I want to put that out there. For every player that was like, wait a minute, this undead fortitude, I'm going to hit it in the head. You can do that with this one, the monster weakness. You can choose to, which zombies, as of course, we know have very low AC. AC of 8, I believe. You can choose to target the head, which has an AC of 12. I might make that a little trickier, but you could balance it depending on the level of your players. And then they can hit it in the head with their attack, and if that reduces them to 0 hit points, you ignore the undead fortitude. Boom. That's so easy. It doesn't do auto crit. It doesn't do, all this extra, does plus this much damage. Just, hey, just ignore their undead fortitude. So if they die, they die. If he dies, he dies. Great. Awesome. I love these mechanics. They work beautifully. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for monster weaknesses. Pros: interesting and thematic weaknesses for hundreds of official 5e monsters, including beasts and NPC stat blocks. We have left no monster or type or beast or whatever behind. Everything has got at least one weakness here that we can exploit, and a lot of them have two because they've got the well, that's my next pro. Most monster entries include combat and social weaknesses, and a lot of social weaknesses, like, for example, the Beholder. I think it was the Beholder. You can like grovel before the Beholder, and then the Beholder might have disadvantage on its insight check if your groveling was a high enough deception roll or something. So those are the kind of like out of combat things that you can do, and they typically involve like different charisma checks you can make. And some of them could even be used technically, in maybe even in combat for some funsies, but a lot of them could be used just, hey, these are, when interacting with this creature, maybe sneaking around a creature or doing something that would involve a social situation or encounter, this weakness could be exploited. Pro: personable experts for each creature type. This was an awesome addition. It really helped add first of all, an awesome layer of art that I really appreciated. But personality, more importantly, because a lot of these big books that are just lists of information, it can often get a little bit lost. And one of the best ways to fix that is by having a in-universe narrator help you along the way. And this does that perfectly because we get a different one for every single type, which I don't know how many there are, but maybe a dozen or so. It's a pretty good amount. With just lovely character art, cool descriptions. All these characters seem fun and interesting, and then they get a little bit of, flavor text here and there, which I think is the perfect amount. So super thumbs up for that. And pro: it's an attractive, easy to read layout with the fabulous original artwork. Absolutely awesome design. The fact that you can cram all of these weaknesses within 60 pages is just incredible. And easy to read, well edited. All of those things really going to be a must-have for anything that's got this much information in it. Cons: I got nothing. Honestly, I think it's a great book. I have no major complaints whatsoever. I think it exceeded my expectations on what monster weaknesses can be, and it's just a really fabulous read. Final verdict: whether a means of on-the-fly balancing, rewarding clever player ideas, or injecting slightly crunchier encounters, Monster Weaknesses is a highly recommended addition to every Dungeon Master's repertoire. Thank you everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. And you can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Thank you.